of the Value Exchange podcast. I'm Annabelle Lambert and I'm here with my regular co-host Rob Pye. Say hello, Rob Pye.
Hello, Rob Pye. Good morning.
The age-old joke there. We are really excited today to be joined by Jimmy Paul, who is currently the head of the Scottish Violence Reduction Unit, but originally crossed paths when he was a director, I think, at the Wellbeing Economy Alliance a few years ago, and it was great to reconnect with him recently. So without further ado, Jimmy, please do tell us about you, who you are, where it all started, and let's take it from there.
Thank you for the introduction, and what a lovely question to start with. Where did it all start? So I grew up in East London before the Olympics, before it was gentrified and was an area of high poverty and deprivation. And I lived in a family where violence was prevalent, and it wasn't an easy upbringing. Cut a very long story short, was very lucky to have a mum who, even though she was struggling with alcohol, would give me some time during her day to teach me how to read and write. And I remember sitting in her room reading books, and one day when I was at nursery, I learned to spell the word aeroplane. And I loved going into school teaching the other kids how to spell the word aeroplane. It felt like a bit of a party trick. It felt like I could kind of impart some knowledge, and it built in me a real kind of love of learning and an appreciation of education. And despite all that was going on around me, it was lovely to have that. I went into the care system though at the age of 11. Didn't have the best experience in the care system.
Well, let me interrupt, because I just always feel moved to interrupt, and it's never normally this early, but sometimes it is. So there's a couple of stories about mums and grandmums, and we've got a young leader on the Commons Fund project called Halim Clift, and he's done some LinkedIn. He's a filmmaking and that, and it, he's just like, I'm going to shout out to my mother naturally. And I had this, drug dealing. I did that. I did da, trouble at school and that. But it was mum and other stories. I remember in Bradford once with a 16-year-old, and it was like not really getting what social care was about and what caring. I don't want to do that all looking after old people. And it's like, have you ever had any? It's like, found out he visited his grandmum almost every day for his whole life, and looked up, and it was his grandmum that was in the flats who, was that. And I think it's really important to shout out, the people, whether they're relatives or not, who have supported one, when times are difficult. So I'm sorry for interrupting so early, but I was a bit moved to magnify that memory. Anyway, you were Care 11 or something. What was that?
Yes. No, thank you. I think that's what I was trying to do, actually, kind of shout out as part of that detour, because that theme sticks, I guess, throughout my childhood. It's a really important one that, a seed that was sown very early on. But went into care in the age of 11, moved around a little bit, and then settled in one placement for a while, and it wasn't very nice. I explain it as out of the fire into the frying pan. So I flip that metaphor, because it wasn't life-threatening, but it wasn't a nice home to grow up in and live in. I was emotionally abused, physical abuse in foster care as well, which isn't very nice. And then cut an even longer story short, because I won't go too much into detail here. I left that foster home 6 months before going to university. So I needed to get my grades to make it to Edinburgh University, where I wanted to study geography. Edinburgh is the birthplace of geography. It was doing better than Oxford and Cambridge at the time I applied. And I also kind of wanted to move away, to get away, somewhere that felt far enough away to be different, but not too far away to be scary. So I moved into residential care, and in this place, it was a unit, not a home. It really felt like that. And there were weekly raids from police on others in the unit. It didn't have a kitchen where things worked. I asked for a tin opener once to open a can of beans, and they said, "We can't trust you with tin openers, you'll attack us with it. So I had a microwave in my room and a shower, and that was it. So it was a tough old 6 months. But I remember going into school, and this theme of school remains really important. At this point, it would have been very easy to just chuck it in. But one, I think that steely determination instilled in me from those very early years experiences with my mum stuck. And two, the kindness of teachers at this point where you could have taken any route. A lot of young people in my career have told me when I've worked with them that when they grow up in the care system, it feels like residential and secure care is a pipeline to prison. And I really felt that as well. And it were teachers that helped to make sure that that wasn't the destination for me. So Miss Vanichka was the head of year, and she said, "What can I do to help? What's it like in your unit?" So she coordinated loads of support from the other teachers. So she washed my clothes on Monday and brought them back to me ironed and smelling fresh on a Tuesday. She didn't have to do that, but she knew that otherwise I'd be washing my clothes in the bath and hanging them up on radiators every week. Mr. Rainford, my PE teacher, he gave me £100 and said, "Look, you will make it to Scotland. You need to buy yourself a warm coat because it's freezing up there." You know, that was very kind of him, and he was right. It is
Yeah.
cold up here.
I just want to say my daughter, because I live in the south of England, and she's gone to
Yeah.
university at Newcastle, so not quite as far. But I said to her, "It's cold up there," and she's like, "I like the cold. I like the cold." And we've subsequently bought a new coat.
And
It's
my son is
relatable.
just back from Durham to Surrey. It's like, "It's really warm down here, Daddy." It's cold.
He's walking about in a vest, is he? Yeah. Mr. Ryder, I worked with his daughter part time in the sports centre. He had me around his house for hot meals, which was around the corner from the school. But he appreciated that otherwise you couldn't. It wasn't possible for me to make hot meals at home, and I needed to be able to focus on study. And Mr. Chokshi, my maths teacher, told him I was struggling to focus in class. He gave me extra tuition in his own time for the topics that I was struggling with most. And as a result of that, I got the straight A's and made it to Edinburgh University. So it's really amazing how at those crucial times, the kindness of people can just keep you right. And a big shout out now to those teachers. So
So
that's
another recurring theme of the work that we're doing is without it sounding too grand, is the need for educational reform. And another guy who's been on the podcast, Lord Jim Knight, and it's just like, why can't we just do less academic stuff and get teachers to teach what they'd like to teach and help them really engage with young people on what it is they're most passionate about. And I feel, having done some work down in Somerset and elsewhere in the UK with the teaching system, that it is absolutely falling apart, and it is violence against teachers, and lack of income, lack of teaching staff, social unrest in classrooms. It's a really messy, horrible system. So what hope do we have in the police force, or as parents, or elsewhere, when actually the teachers need to be well. Teachers need to be able to do what their calling has brought them to do, and help the pastoral side of. I'm talking about doing some washing for you and that, and just looking after you and giving money and support. It's just wonderful. But I wonder nowadays whether we've lost something there. Where we're losing something. Anyway, it's a bit of rhetoric more than a question. So that was another shout out there in your journey.
yeah, absolutely. And it's that's what I'm hearing. I think we've lost something. It's really hard when your time and the resources are much more constrained to lift your head and do that human thing. As a human, you want to help someone, get through a tough patch. So what is it you can do to help? Anything you can do, you would do it. But if your mind is completely taken, and if you're experiencing violence at work, in schools, then it's extremely difficult to do that. It's different. And I visited my school just a few years after to go and give a talk to some young people there. And teachers said to me even then, this was a good 10 years ago now, it's different already, and it'll be even more different now. So yeah, that was a shout out to teachers. And then I made it up to Edinburgh University. I kind of say escaped, but also ran towards something that was one of the best decisions I've ever made. For me, university was partly about the study. Loved geography. Proud to study at a great university, but the city of Edinburgh, what a city, what a place to study. The nightlife is good, the intramural sports. I probably focus more on football than I did my studies. But for me, it was also a chance to grow up and make new friends. My best pals are those that I met and lived with at university. And it was a challenge just to be a bit silly for a few years as well, and um,
Can I
possibly
ask
the four
Jimmy?
best years of my life.
Can I ask Jimmy what was it about geography that was drawing you there? Why? I have two minds about geography. I wasn't allowed to do A level because it didn't fit in the timetable, which is really frustrating because it's probably one of my favourite subjects. But I'm definitely a human geography person, not a physical geography person. Not really into volcanoes. But what was it about geography that was calling you?
Interestingly, I started with the interest in the physical geography. So I remember at the age of 12 or 13 seeing on the news there was going to be a hurricane in the US that might move over towards the UK, and just being like, what? Are we going to get a hurricane here? And it didn't happen, it always kind of quietens down a little bit by the time it reaches us across the ocean. But just completely mesmerized by this idea of extreme weather. But then I really like the idea of volcanoes and earthquakes, but where that moved, and I've always had a strong social justice drive. I think I don't know what it is. Maybe it's that love of education. Maybe it's that strong sense of right or wrong that I've had from a young age. But just seeing that actually, I think it was Hurricane Katrina, and the way that disproportionately impacted communities that were less well off. And that actually, whether it was the delayed funding or the delayed support to get people out of that area, I just couldn't believe that we have injustices across the world that would expose certain people to things more prominently than others because of their wealth or because of where they live. So actually, my interest in physical geography shifted to an interest in human geography, which is about people and space and how we use spaces. Kind of a bit more social anthropology, a bit more sociology.
Another interruption. I've just finished a book from a guy called Andy Stern, and always want to call him Jim. I don't know why, but he's going to come on the podcast. He was president of the largest American union, and there's a Katrina story. Really, quite an interesting part of the book. He helped Obama, into power, and really massive days of the union. And it is about social justice. He's a massive fan of universal basic income. Has lobbied for it for ages. But in that disaster that was Katrina, where almost the work that was there disintegrated into what we would now call gig economy, or sort of just ad hoc informal work, where immigrants were coming in from all over the world to kind of work almost like chain gangs or whatever. So that the link between natural disaster, social justice, and work, I think Katrina's one of the best stories. And I'd never link it to geography. As Annabelle said,
Well,
human geography.
you'd be pleased that my daughter did geography A level recently, and it's very much a key case study. Nowadays in the curriculum. So
She's got to read. She's got to read Jim or Andy's book, as his proper name is.
But Annabelle, to answer your question as well, it was a mixture of that, and it was a mixture of I loved my geography teachers as well. They were brilliant, and they just seemed like the nicest department and the most approachable people. Mr. Flaxman was my head of year. Still have him on Facebook. It's lovely to check in with him and see what he's up to every now and again. And same with the others. So there was not just the interest in the topic; there was that human element as well. I also found it probably the toughest topic. I don't know why. For some reason, I found it quite hard to grasp, and I liked the challenge. So it was a no-brainer for me.
So good time at university, geography, then the brave world of what happens next.
Well, I graduated. I had a place to do a law conversion degree in Edinburgh University, the 2-year accelerated degree. But being an English student in Scotland, you can't get student finance, to do another degree, and I had no way of funding it. I had some offers of friends' parents who would fund it, but I would pay them back quite quickly, and it just wasn't feasible. So I had to stop that, and all of a sudden I was unemployed. I had really high hopes of doing something quite ambitious, becoming a lawyer, that social justice thing I think I was excited about. But all of a sudden, yeah, unemployed. And when you leave care, it's not like, sadly, like it should be, I think. It's not like you get support for as long as you need it or can go back home somewhere. All of a sudden, people describe it as the care cliff, and it feels like support ceases very quickly. So my social worker visited that summer. I graduated the next month, and he said, "Right, we'll pay your rent until the end of August, and then that's you." I said, "Okay, that's fine. I'll do what I can, but is there nothing else? Is there no other support at all?" Whilst lots of friends were going back to their homes to figure out what they would do next, or to save a bit of money before moving somewhere else to take up another job, it felt quite isolating, quite, really difficult. And then obviously having the degree kind of snatched away because I couldn't find that funding was tough as well. So I worked in jobs that I didn't enjoy for a year. I worked in banks, I worked at Amazon. I was a sports coach, which was fun, but not easy in terms of the hours. And just I never felt invested in. Paid very low, given tasks, not real work, not meaningful work, treated as just in time inventory. Checking in and out when you go to the loo, checking in and out when you need your lunch break, and it just wasn't very nice. And I always believed that I could do something where I felt more invested in, and something where I'd make a difference to people. So I applied for lots of graduate schemes, lots and lots and lots. I failed many times, but I felt like a graduate scheme would be the opportunity. And I heard about and got on to probably the best one I applied for, which was the NHS Management Training Scheme. So I was absolutely delighted because that's a 3-year scheme. You get a degree, get a master's degree paid for. You can choose what placements you do across the health board that you're located in. So I had real freedom to choose the roles that I wanted to do. And you got probably the best thing for me was executive coaching. I've never had coaching before, quite similar to therapy, I guess, that existential coaching. But that was life changing. That whole experience of starting to feel invested in, being able to choose roles that I was interested in, whether it's working in a hospital operationally, managing different units. I managed the mother and baby mental health unit for a while and the regional eating disorders unit, or whether it's working to improve children's experiences of being diagnosed with autism, whether it's managing a national network for children who are visually impaired or a biochemistry network. I had some real brilliant experiences across the NHS.
I want to just really briefly, apologies for labouring everything, but it's just so fascinating that something that really just spoke to me that I feel moved to kind of come back on is the unemployed bit, and I'm kind of fortunate enough to have just not had that experience, but having hired or invested in 65 young people who the government said they were going to be long-term unemployed. I can't imagine anybody with more to say on how to reform um, the future of work and social justice than people who have been on the receiving end of actually being unemployed. And I feel hugely strongly, having worked and become friends with a lot of those people, that the sort of experience of being outside the system is just invaluable, but horrible. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I just, in many ways, fortunate to have had a time unemployed, but you wouldn't wish it on anyone. And the stigma and the being the victim of a system that is about behavioural modification rather than investing in you. Just the opposite of that. And I sort of feel it from a third person because I've never been in it like unemployed, as in I've got no money, I need to, be on universal credit or something. And it really is something that is an eye opener for those people who have not been lucky enough to have been unemployed and sort of welcome to the real world. That's a big part of why we're doing what we're doing now rather than our own projects. It's kind of like the common is just has been shaped very much by that pandemic experience of, well, actually, what would life be like if you were on the other side, on a pipeline to prison or whatever, because actually absent opportunities. So
And
yeah.
I'm glad you paused there. You're spot on. I remember those. It was 3 months or so, but I remember them like it was years. And if you miss an appointment, you don't get your money, even if you're going to an interview at short notice. It's really strange, and for me, it was quite triggering, I guess, because I remember growing up in Newham in East London, and my parents at times when my dad couldn't find work had to go and get his doll or the gyro, all these other words used to describe it, and the queue at the post office and people shouting things as they walked past that queue at the post office. I remember at school, it's funny how we used to bake this in. I like to hope this doesn't happen anymore, but when they read out the register in primary and secondary school, you would answer with yes or free. Free meaning free dinner, as in being, on the dole, or basically it means are your parents poor? Are your parents not poor? And, in so many ways, it was baked into how we were segregated. And that's why I think I found it particularly tough as well, because it reminded me of that and it made me feel kind of lower down than other people because of
So,
my
so
past.
on the missing an appointment, universal credit, the young leader, missed a telephone call from the job centre by 10 minutes. He didn't realise, and then without any process or justice, he was docked 2 months of £600 benefit, and for him that was tragic. Rent, life, living, and then it's going to take a year, 18 months to appeal it. But when you have that asymmetry of power, it's like it's got all this power, and then suddenly you're the victim, and it's like you miss a phone call, and yeah, so it's like, wow, I never wish it upon anybody, but the circumstances could just um, turn things around so quickly for so many people.
Similar to that story, I spoke to someone who left prison a couple of years ago and explained to me how desperate they were to turn their life around. And they knew that a job would be at the heart of that, some money coming in, some employment, a sense of purpose, a good job. And um, the guy said to me he went straight to the job centre after he left prison, after he got out. And they said, do you have an appointment? No. Have you booked in an appointment? Are you registered? No, no, no. But please, I need some help. I'll do anything just now. I'll do absolutely anything. Help me out. And the answer was no, because computer says no. And you just think, how inhumane,
Yeah.
how inhumane. And that is a very recent story. I can't imagine things have changed much, if at all, from then.
I was
So,
reading
yes.
Margaret Heffernan's done a very short piece, I think this today in FT or something that I came across this morning about sort of this whole piece about being, getting into work, the soul destroying nature of recruitment as well at the moment on the other side. And it's just, why aren't we helping people? We seem to be just crushing everybody. Surely the answer is we turn it on its head and go, look, everybody needs to succeed. Let's help. It's just very unhelpful, everything, about everything at the moment.
I agree. And so that continues. So, time in the NHS, right? Absolutely fab. Met some really good people, some lifelong friends actually, and saw and met some of the best managers, and really learned a lot from those people. To feel so invested in as well was really special. And it's where I grew in confidence, and I realised that I I want to be in roles where I can make sure that my values are leading to the change I think we need to see in Scotland, in the UK, across the world. And there came a point, actually, at the age of 26, where I had an 8-year long complaint upheld against the local authority where I grew up. So it
Wow,
was through stage one, stage two, stage three, an ombudsman, and it was upheld completely in my favour and some. So
well
more
done.
than my concerns were upheld. Yeah. And it took a lot of battling and a lot of emails and many, many more evenings and weekends worth of finding evidence and battling and challenging than it should have, because it was actually quite obvious. And I realised that I had a lot of knowledge of how to navigate care system, the systems that do as you describe, Rob, that kind of oppressor or kind of the decider of the system, the one with the power and the one without, and how to rebalance that. So I decided to move from the health service to the looked after children sector and work in care reform. So I was really fortunate to get a job at the Centre for Excellence for Looked After Children in Scotland. And I worked there for a consultant for 4 years. And it was really enlightening. It was really interesting, uh, frustrating at times, because I think when you've got a personal experience of an issue, you maybe see the root causes a bit more. It's easier to see the bigger picture. And sometimes you do project your own experience onto the work you're doing. That can be healthy, that can sometimes be unhealthy. I think in a healthy way, I brought a challenge to Celsius and the work we were doing. And I realised, we really did need to see a bigger picture shift in the care system, a really ambitious vision, and work collectively towards that. And during the middle 2 years of my 4 years at Celsius, the Independent Care Review was commissioned in Scotland, the world's first root and branch review of a care system. And the chair, Fiona Duncan, who is absolutely incredible, was appointing co-chairs to play a lead role in writing the conclusions of the review. And I was appointed one of the co-chairs for the workforce work stream. So all of a sudden I was working at Celsius, trying to make change in my day job, but also one day a week supporting this brilliant, ambitious process. And at the heart of it was listening to children, young people, adults with care experience, infants, social workers, foster carers, kinship carers, everyone involved in state care in any form. And what a privilege that was. That, as well as my current job, two of the greatest privileges of my life. Um, and over 3 years, we listened to 5,500 people all across Scotland. Um, in places and spaces they felt safe and wanted to share with us. Listening to people in ways they wanted to share. Is it a poem? Is it a song? Is it speaking? Is it side by side in a car? I spent some time in residential care homes, and young people didn't want to share with me for a while until I'd played PlayStation with them and got to know them and had a coffee with them. And then whilst we're playing Crash Bandicoot alongside me, because that, by the way, feels a bit less intense than staring at someone across the table, they would share some stuff with me, which I could then, with their permission, feed into the review. It was just an enlightening, fab experience. And what an honour to be a part of that.
And I think
So we've heard. Oh, go on, Anna.
sorry,
Sorry, Annabelle.
we had quite a very. You've reminded me of a story of somebody in youth work in Somerset who had absolutely made his connection with this young person over gaming. This was he was into it. He wasn't just doing it. He really loved it, and he spent far too long at this person's house. And made that connection, but it made such a difference. And I think this constant time bound, you can have 3 minutes of my time for this particular care, or this or this or this, is just very inhuman. You just reminded me how important it is. If you're going to listen, you're going to listen, and it's going to take as long as it's going to take, isn't it, to do that. The investment's worth
Yeah,
it.
and it's like ethnography and youth work, where as a detached youth worker, you might go into the community just to listen and to be among and to kind of soak it up and to not judge and certainly not convict or report or have any projection of opinion. But it seems as though we've kind of lost that part of our sense, which is just listening, and being among. Um, was it was so much listening I'd be quite frustrated with so much listening, because the more you listen, the more you think, in terms of a system that might be looking like the post office, in terms of injustice and adult social care, children's services. We know the huge, energy that is kind of going into things that, and then yet the net is that perhaps we're not listening enough, or we're really falling short of acceptable standards.
You know, just before I answer that on listening, I couldn't agree more. I think again in times of economic public sector hardship in terms of funding changes over years, in recent times, listening is seen as this thing which is frivolous, additional, not part of your core work, but actually in order to deliver the change and make work and initiatives and whatever it might be meaningful for those you exist to serve, you've got to listen. You've got to listen well. That's got to be the first port of call. It really needs to be. Did it get frustrating? Yes and no. Hearing stories where far too many people in and around the care system had a poor experience was sad. It was frustrating. But hearing from social workers who care so deeply, from foster carers who are doing their best, from teachers who are bending over backwards to do the right thing for their children, that was also really inspirational and hopeful. So it was frustrating and motivating and hopeful in equal measure for me. Others found it more frustrating than I, though. Yeah.
Okay. So what happened? What happens next? What are the other moments in the journey to today?
So the care review launched because we made a real effort to get cross-party support. It had cross-party support, and actually they were vying to be more ambitious with each other over its implementation, which was brilliant to see. It's rare you see one party launch something and the Tories say to them, actually, I think you should invest more and think about this, and then Labour are saying, what about this? And the Greens are coming in as well. It was brilliant to see, and I think a real signal to those with care experience or in care at the moment. This government and politicians do care, and there is work to be done. So a 10-year implementation plan and a funded plan was, the promise was set up to deliver this across 10 years. But I'm not part of that now. I am from a different part of the sector. I left Celsius not long after, during COVID actually, and I took my first job heading up a charity, a brilliant charity where I met you, called the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. Again, one of those many opportunities. I see a job, I think, should I throw my hat in the ring? I've got no chance because it's a fab charity with a brilliant cause, and I'm not an economist, and all these imposter syndrome thoughts that come into mind. But I went through what was quite a robust process and was delighted to be appointed. It was a charity in startup phase, looking to do bold things as a small in size, but punched above its weight for the few years that they had been volunteer led, and now they were moving into kind of being a funded organisation. And the purpose of as we all Scotland, as it's beautifully called, because it's about all of us coming together. It's about an economy that serves us and people and planet, not us serving the economy relentlessly. It was a brilliant opportunity to start to build a small team, to build a sustainable charity that would be here for hopefully the next 10 or 15 years, but maybe it wouldn't be needed beyond that because we have an economy that serves people and planet. I think we should always work towards our own obsolescence, and I was always clear at We All that that would be the goal, our own obsolescence. So it was lovely to set them up. It was lovely to initiate some really exciting projects there. Build a team, amplify some really exciting voices, and to learn a lot, because I learned every day in that role from very intelligent people who knew things that I didn't know anything about, especially kind of work around the economy.
And yeah, so it's. I mean, there are a number of these sort of orthogonal approaches that say, people and planet, and then a move to Police Scotland, the Violence Reduction Unit. I mean, this imposter syndrome expression that you mentioned, it is a bit of, your squiggly career is in fact, very squiggly. NHS geography, NHS, wellbeing economy, and now violence reduction. You must. We were talking to some students today, who have interned with us, about one's comfort zone, and about how it's really good to stretch and step outside, so not such that you feel vulnerable or you don't feel you're in a safe place, don't feel psychologically safe, but actually to always expand that frame of reference. And it strikes me that your expansion tank is always being stretched. Is that something you're conscious of, or you're just happens, or it's like, oh, I haven't police violence reduction. That's quite a big step.
Which bit of
Do you know?
social justice haven't you touched yet? There's a thread, isn't there? Obviously,
Yeah,
really a thread. It's like,
it looks
anything,
squiggly.
yeah.
It looks squiggly, but there is that firm social justice element. You're spot on, Annabelle. I was going to say that, but there's also, oh, you're right. I love to expand. I love to challenge myself. But every single day in this job, in my last job, in every job I've had, actually, I've not been a clinician when I was in the NHS. So there was that imposter syndrome. I had a lived experience of the care system, but I wasn't, say, an analyst or a social worker or a foster carer. So some of that professional expertise had to be learned quite quickly. I also wasn't an improvement. I did the Scottish Improvement Learning Award, so I wasn't a quality improver until I did that. In my last job, wasn't an economist, and in this job, I don't feel like an expert in violence reduction, that's for sure. But it was a no-brainer. Yeah, I think you've got to embody. I think the future of leadership, good leadership, is a more feminine style of leadership, which isn't top-down, which isn't the master or the owner at the top. It is a humble appreciation that you are one part of a system and everybody has knowledge that can contribute. And I know that because that is very true. And I've got a brilliant, skilled team at the VRU that it's not for me to tell them what the solutions are. It's for them to help build them and for me to support them to go away and deliver. When I saw the job come up, it was another example of, I'll throw my hat in the ring. There were very few things that would have tempted me away from WeAll because I loved that job. But I thought I'd throw my hat in the ring for this. I had heard all about the VRU because one of my co-chairs at the Care Review was John Carnacan, who helped set it up. Now, he is one of the most impressive people I've ever met. The way in which he tells a story, the way in which he created the fierce urgency to do something about violence 20 years ago in Scotland, and in Glasgow in particular, and the steep decline that resulted from his work. And he, again, in that humble style of leadership, will point to teachers, point to midwives and GPs and politicians and social workers and others, because he doesn't feel like he did it, but he was so crucial in building that sense of hope, that growing chorus, as it's often called, for that Glasgow miracle. Steep decline in murder and violence at a time when Glasgow is the murder capital of the developed world. Now it's much more in line with, in terms of violence and murder, with the rest of the UK, and actually performing better per capita than other parts of Scotland. So it's been incredible impact. And I knew all about the VRU. I knew about their special work, their innovation, the public health approach, which I just love. And just how stories and lived experiences would be at the heart of this. So I threw my hat in the
So
ring.
maybe just to step back and say, what is the VRU? What's a public health approach? So I'm conscious that we can often get into buzzword bingo, or sort of, for people like, what violence reduction unit? What public health? What does these words mean?
And thank you for doing that, because I forget sometimes. And
We all do.
is it just yeah, and I don't like forgetting. I really don't. I don't like using
My favourite story on that was my sister moved from the public sector to the private sector, and she said for the first 2 weeks she did not understand what anybody was talking about because it was constantly, just initials and just stuff. That it was totally different language to her, and of course it works both ways. But,
it absolutely is. It really is. So The Violence Reduction Unit, or VRU, Scotland set up the Violence Reduction Unit 20 years ago, and it was set up to reduce violence. Now, specifically, what it did in the early days was target gang violence in Scotland, where far too often people were presenting in hospitals with stabbing injuries, so people carrying sharp instruments, um, other types of injuries that resulted in kind of gang violence as a result of that. So it was those in A&E that were saying to John and the police, look, we've got a real problem here. We're being called in to do additional shifts every weekend. What are the underlying causes and how can we get to those? So John spoke to the World Health Organization. They advised him on what it means to embody a public health approach. A public health approach is you start by understanding what the data is telling you. So get the health data, get the police data, try and understand not just the data that exists, but insights that could go alongside that to enrich it as well. So what are you seeing on CCTV? What are you hearing? Because not every instance of violence is recorded. Not every gang violence instance on the streets is aware of in the statistics, is made aware of. So what can you bring together from those you know that can enlighten you as to what the challenges are? You understand the root causes, and often the root causes for violence are, the road to violence begins in schools, it begins in communities, it begins in homes where trauma is a factor, or being addicted to substances is a big thing, because many of these people are dealing with the intergenerational trauma of their parents, or actually it's just so hard to get by on the money and the resources you've got, or actually you just need to numb yourself somehow from whatever you've experienced. There are many reasons, and obviously being involved in the care system, being homeless, all of these things are some of the driving causes. And how can you address those as much as you can? And then the next part of the public health approach is to test, innovate, test, innovate, test, innovate. And it's okay to fail. In fact, it's good to fail as long as you learn from it. It's really encouraged as part of that public health approach. And then the next part, the last part, is to scale up and hand over, if you like. So if you find something that works, make that commonplace for all people across Scotland, or all people that need that support, and move on to new innovation. So that's the VRU and the public health approach.
And I just want to just make the point that in the news we all hear about gang and knife crime and hospital A&E, but you're also concerned about violence against women and girls, domestic violence. It's like wherever it originates, whoever the vulnerable people are, whoever the perpetrator, the victims, the causes of that. So it's the whole shooting match. It's not just drugs, gangs, sharp instrument A&E. It's everything that is in that fairly wide definition of violence that you would be concerned with.
The VRU always has been concerned with all of that, but I think lots of people are most interested in that gang violence and the interventions there. But you're right, and actually I think gang violence is less a challenge nowadays than it was 20 years ago, but post-COVID, domestic violence, the data is telling us, is a real challenge, a real issue. So what are we doing about that, and who are we partnering with on that? We're hearing about violence in schools. We've already touched on that today. A challenge in England and, of course, in Scotland. So what can we do about that? We've got to think really deeply about that public health approach and the root causes and how we can impact on them. What the VRU's always done, and what we need to do as we're building our plan for the year ahead now, is think about primary, secondary and tertiary prevention. Primary being work that doesn't even look like violence reduction. It looks like strengthening families. It looks like building emotional articulation and resilience and a growth mindset in our young children. And it looks like happy, flourishing communities. That is primary reduction, primary prevention of violence. Secondary prevention is when young people usually, but sometimes older people too, are displaying risky behaviours. Are they getting involved in drugs? Are they starting to act out in a certain way at school? Are they starting to not present at school? Are they falling in with people who might be poor influences? And at that point, how can you divert people away from that as quickly as possible so they don't get involved in violence? And then tertiary violence reduction is someone is been involved in violence, whether it's for the first time or the 301st time, if we can try and make sure that's the last time, then we're doing very well. So often we support programs, we've initiated some programs where we support people on that pipeline out of prison back into community and help them with accommodation, with jobs, with reconnecting with their families, with whatever it might be. Because if you've had a stint in prison, it's pretty hard to go back out to live in society. So, yeah, we've got a lot of work to do and a lot of thinking to do in the coming weeks, actually, as we're finalising our business plan for the year ahead. But all of those things will be a factor and considered in our plan for the year ahead. But also, I guess, making sure, and this is a nice caveat, I guess, to where our conversations have been the last, it's not a caveat, sorry, it's a segue to how our conversations have been going in recent months. What are we doing to make sure that we're accountable, yes, to Scottish Government as our funder, but also to people with lived experience of these issues? Those, when you were talking, Rob, earlier about benefits, being on benefits, like being unemployed and navigating that system, if you listen to the stories of those with lived experience, you will get insights that you wouldn't get otherwise. And how can we do this in relation to violence reduction? So I'm really delighted that you reached out and connected to me over that, because I think we've got lots of shared interest in how we really change that for violence reduction in Scotland.
Yeah. So, squiggly career, you've touched and you've been involved in many systems. If somebody's watching, particularly if Idris Elba's watching, who's campaigning for gang and knife crime reduction. I want to get involved. What can I do? It's often a feeling of helplessness. I'm only one person. And this is a very big world. And what's some of the practical advice that, with your squiggly experience and social justice, that you're speaking to someone? What can they do? How can they help?
So I'm firmly of the view that everyone's got a role to play in violence reduction, whether that's making sure that you're voting for people that have the right policies to make sure that we're supporting families to stay together, we're investing in an upstream preventative way, we're shifting and ceding power to those who have lived experience of these issues as to refine everything that we do. That's one thing. Another thing, and again, I'm such a big fan of John Carnacan, and I'm going to quote him again. He often says, how can we love our children if we don't even like them? And if you think about, when I went to Centre Parks with my two boys, I've got a 3-year-old and a now 1-year-old, and we went back in autumn, everything about Centre Parks is designed with children in mind. You've got a sink and a urinal lower down, so it's easier for children to use. You've got a soft play in every cafe. Everything is colourful. All the signs have pictures on. It was just brilliantly designed. And then you come back into the world and you're in roads that are unsafe. You're back in loos where you're having to lift your child up to do a wee. You're kind of having to keep your children entertained when it's not ideal. But during my time at the Care Review, one of the work streams was called Best Place in the World. And John Carnacan headed that up as well, actually. And, one of the findings from that was that there are countries all over the world that by design make children feel valued. Is it in restaurants, children are allowed and encouraged to run around rather than just sit quietly at table and eat their food, and messy eating is absolutely fine. Is it other parts of the world where the design of the roads are a bit more colourful and a bit more green and full of trees, whatever it might be? We've all got a role to play to think about how we can help children feel a little bit more loved rather than just tolerated, and to advocate for that in any sphere of influence that you have. So those are a few things that kind of citizens can do, if you like. But there's always more that we could do. If you work in the public sector, how are you seeding and sharing power with those who have lived experience of these issues? How are you really listening to those who are affected by this? And opening your heart and mind as to what you might do differently, because that bit's quite hard. It's easy to listen, but then converting that into action that people with these lived experiences of these issues would be happy with, that is the tricky bit. What else? How are you demonstrating an empathy for people who have lived through really hard times? Because that's not always easy either. It's easy to point a finger. It's easy to say, they're X, Y, and Z, to other people and create an us and them. But actually, it's harder, but nicer and much more impactful to understand people's journeys and where they've come from and to demonstrate a kindness. And the ripple effect of that is huge. If you work in, say, the public sector, or you have influence through your work, what can you do in times of economic hardship to think about pooling budgets and resources and data and knowledge to work more closely together? One of the things I say is, we talk about collaboration and co-production all the time. It is important, but to try and separate myself and encourage us to go further, I use the phrase radical collaboration now. It's a bit gimmicky. I get that. That's fine. But I'm trying to insinuate that we've got to go further than we have been in recent years to pool our knowledge and resources and budgets, because if we can share data in the right way, if we can share insights, if we can spend money in the right way, we will have a much better impact on people. So you asked me about that squiggly line in that career. Now I'll jump back to my time at Celsius and working with social workers. And what I saw in Scotland was a child's journey through the care system was really difficult to see, not just because of how hard it is for the child, but for how illogical systems can sometimes work. So you have a child, something happens in the home, and maybe the police or social worker are involved. And then in Scotland, the children's hearing system become involved. You're in front of a panel and they decide what happens with you. And you may get to stay at home with a bit of support. You may have to go into the care system and be looked after in kinship care or foster care or residential care. And at that point, a whole new budget, a whole new pocket of money is unlocked to support that child. But actually, if the child stays at home, that money is not available to be used to strengthen and keep that family together. It's a much lesser resource, and it becomes more and more intensive. And yet, keeping families together is so important. Maintaining relationships where you can, where it's safe to do so, is always the right thing to do. And yet, you go on a typical care journey, sadly, kinship care, foster care, residential care, secure care. Not everybody makes it all the way there, but most of those in secure care have kind of exhausted all the other options in terms of what the system has decided is right for them. And secure care costs a significant amount of money. And
Yeah,
actually,
we
if you
had some
don't,
work in Reading where I think, was it Annabelle, the top four? This was
Yeah,
just
four
council. It
people,
was like four.
£750,000 a year. Four people cost like the council for
And so,
whatever
can you
internet.
get all these? Can't we just send them to Eton and because it's a lot? And it's just this crazy like narrative that develops, but based on some silly cases that are just eating resources terribly. Um,
and
my brain is exploding from that last segment, Jimmy. I'm going to have to listen to it
I
again
just
because
yeah.
let me just final words, thoughts, suggestions. So I just wouldn't mind a couple of minutes at the end, Jimmy, with you. Where next? I mean, where haven't you been? What 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 bricks? Where's the journey? What's the next chapter? That maybe not after the police, but what's the change that you'd like to be part of in the the context of VRU, and and where would you like to go next? What's that sort of immediate next journey for you?
so I'm keen to be at the VRU for its short, medium term future. Delighted and honoured to be here, and for me, a big part of that is trying to make us obsolete, because Scotland is so healthy and safe, and violence is not an issue that is pressing, because we have embedded all the right measures and protective measures into society that we're not needed. That's the goal, so that in 15, 20
And
years'
I've heard
time.
many chief execs say that, and I don't believe them. I believe you when you're saying that, because it's kind of like, there's that sort of genuineness. You can tell if somebody said, and I wouldn't be impolite if I didn't believe you to say that, but it's I can imagine that you can really get hold of that vision and see that actually, well, no, we don't really need to do this, and that is very inspiring as a vision, isn't it? It's kind of like, actually, should we need to do this stuff? It's like,
Rob, I think for some it's inspiring, but for others, it makes them concerned about their pension and their employment and their future jobs, and that worries me, because our accountability and our, you know, what we do should be in service of. And if we build people up, if we build our employees up and skill them up, they will find employment elsewhere. They will be fine. But ultimately, we don't want people coming to harm or get involved in violence. So you're right, Rob. It's. I really mean that. I really mean it when I say that. I want us to be obsolete. I find it inspiring when other people say that as well. And you need a strategy to get to that point. So for me, the next step for the VRU looks like having a clear understanding of what that third horizon of Scotland looks like. So when I say third horizon, I think it was Graham Lester who wrote a book on the kind of three horizons and leadership and long-term future. And the first horizon is the immediate, what's happening this year. The second horizon is the medium term. Third horizon is the long term. If you think in 20, 30, 40 years into the future, and really, do we want more hospitals because people are so sick? And do we want more funding for the VRU because violence is still happening? And do we want bigger social work departments because kids are still coming into care? Or actually, do we want less hospitals, enough to treat people when they become unwell, but actually we're living such healthy, thriving lives that we don't need hospitals so much, and preventable illnesses are prevented? Or the VRU doesn't need to exist, as I've already explained. Social work is less an issue because, a big part of the promise is to expect to see less children needing to come into care because families are stronger. And we
and this is so brilliant because heard a venture capitalist talk about um, hospitals, social care, people intensive caring industries as through the eyes of traditional labor economics. This is just going to suck the whole resources of the system until we die. Metaphorically, economically, because you cannot project from where we are now to a system that does not implode on itself with the current trajectory, because people are getting older, we're getting better at sickness, we're getting better at all of those things. Therefore, the linear thinking of economics is we're just all going to die because that will consume. But what if you think in a contrarian way and say, well, why do we need those big hospitals? Why can't we do more assisted living at home? Why can't we do more? And let's imagine hospitals shrinking. And it's just back to why my brain was exploding in your previous segment, because just to think and stop and take a moment to think about what would the world be like if we provided a vision for children that was safe and secure and caring. And we did, we tried to do a public health approach to childhood and say, let's make childhood okay for everybody and just focus on that. And then almost all the yeah, I'm afraid I'm going to need to stop you in a minute because I'm going to have to lie down after this this interview. But that is a brilliant. I love the vision stuff. I am I'm very, very motivated always by the long term, and I'm going to hold that. No VRU, smaller hospitals, social care, collaborative budgets, and
no need for charity at all.
No need. We don't need it. We shouldn't have it, and it's a sad indictment if those systems have to exist, isn't it?
Yeah.
Jimmy, I'd like to thank you very sincerely for coming on the show, and look forward to keeping in touch. So until the next time, thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. That's great.